This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to the husband and wife founder duo, Peterson and Richard DiBona. We're talking about the app they're building called Descrybe, which seeks to level the legal research playing field. On today's episode, we're going to hear the story of how a data-driven software engineer and a systems-thinking marketer, who also happen to be husband and wife, decided to take on the giants of legal research. The year was 2021. The world was still reeling from the pandemic, and Richard DiBona found himself staring down a 50-page legal opinion. He wasn't a lawyer, he was a software engineer, but he was facing a personal employment issue, and to figure it out and not spend thousands of dollars in legal fees, the only tools he had at his disposal were Google Scholar and a stack of legal bedtime reading material that would make most people's eyes glaze over. So while Richard was wading through this legalese, his marketer wife, Cara Peterson, began to see a different side of the problem. With a background in public health, she saw a massive societal bottleneck, A2J, or access to justice. She was thinking to herself, if two college-educated professionals in a suburb full of attorneys found the law this impenetrable, what about everyone else? Fast forward a few months, and they had an aha moment. It's late 2022, and ChatGPT hits the scene. When OpenAI released ChatGPT, most people just saw a chatbot on steroids. But what Richard saw was access to an API connection that could summarize, reason, and if built right, democratize the 100+ million row database of case law he was already beginning to compile. So what they do, they decided to create an app. They called it Describe with a Y. And unlike legacy giants that charge thousands of dollars a month, they built Describe to be an AI native app from the ground up that provides access to case law and chat features that help users answer legal questions. And the cool thing is they built it without the need for huge overhead, and they didn't utilize vibe coding shortcuts. What they did do was spend over 100 billion tokens cleaning and structuring the primary law to ensure the answers weren't just fast, but authoritative. So let's get to it. We're going to hear about how a two-person, unfunded team is proving you don't need a billboard in Times Square to build a moat. You just need better data, better systems, and the guts to take on the status quo. So tell me about being married co-founder. How's that working?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on which one of us you ask.
And the day, right?
Right.
I think it's great because we're on the same page, obviously, because we get along really well and our skill sets are perfectly complementary because I'm engineering and she's marketing. So there's not much overlap in our skills, but we have two of the most important skill sets together. The downside, I would say, is probably like the 24/7 access. Like I work all the time and sometimes I just want to watch like a Celtics playoff game and she's like, can you update this on the website? And I'm like,
This is
should I
true.
just watch the Patriots playoff game or the Celtics playoff game or whatever? And yeah, so that would be the only thing is there's no off time.
And I would say, like, yeah, to add to that, one of the things I think that founders struggle with is sort of like alignment on values or sort of where you want to exit or not, or how are you building the company. Like being married, we kind of already know our values are aligned. So that helps. Like, so we don't have to have these kind of discussions about, what are we trying to do and all that. But like Rich said, like it can take over everything, which, you have to kind of keep an eye on that. Although it is every marketer's dream to have 24/7 IT assistants that can't escape them.
How do you do that? Like literally it is 24/7. Like, do you guys decide, hey, it's Saturday, we are not going to talk about the company? Like, how do you set the boundary?
Our sons play volleyball. One of them is at college playing volleyball. One of them's in high school. So we go to their tournaments. We walk the dogs together and try to lay off fit. We try to go on dates, although we end up talking about things. It is hard. It's hard. You're absolutely right.
What about, have you run into anything yet? I mean, because it's still early days, so probably not, but well, Cara, you wanted to do something, and Richard, you wanted to go like another direction on like a feature, or even maybe where to spend money, or has that happened yet? And how do you address that?
Oh, yeah. Like, because, sometimes we'll come at a problem from a different perspective. Like, I'll be coming at something about, like, maybe how it's going to look to the market or how are we going to talk about it. And then, Rich is obviously really focused on the architecture and all that. So we're very led by the product. So we would never lead with like how we want to talk about over how we should build it. So the tension usually balances out, but it's some slight difference in risk profile too. Like what are we willing? I'm like always very concerned about making sure everything's perfectly buttoned up. And, engineers are a little more like, well, let's try it and see.
You got to ship it, right?
Yeah, so I'm always plowing forward with new features.
Yeah.
Because sometimes cars like, "Do you think we should build that new thing or just wait a bit?" And in the meantime, I'm just building it, and then when it
Yeah.
comes out, she's like, "Oh, I'm glad you built
Yeah.
that." So it does.
And this is what advisors are for, right? So we have like 5 awesome advisors, and they're so great at this. One in particular, he's our sort of main advisor, and he's great at helping us think through these areas, and sort of come to a decision that's best for the company rather than, a battle of egos or something.
You guys are the perfect to be co-founders. You got the tech founder and you got the marketing co-founder. The reason I think that's so perfect is because I'm a lawyer by training and I launched a company 10 years ago, but I was a litigator. Like, I mean, but it was always kind of entrepreneurial, but I still mainly, always worked in the law. And what's the one thing I had to learn? Marketing. And I love it. Marketing is so important. And especially in the legal world, I don't think people always understand that. So that's a great combo. Yet you don't have to find the marketer. You got one.
That's exactly right, and also it's things you don't have to pay for, right? So when you think about and we're sort of like the perfect poster child for how AI can sort of light small teams on fire, like in a good way, or light a fire under them, I guess maybe is a better way to put it, and so if you don't have to out of the gate pay for your engineering or your
Yeah.
marketing, like
Well,
that's helpful.
that is helpful.
Now we just need like a GC that we don't have to pay for, which actually we kind of have through one of our advisors.
You've got it. You just go to the app, you've got it.
Just
Yeah,
ask
yeah, yeah.
Claude.
Uh,
No kidding. That's a joke.
and so I guess I got a twofold question, but kind of related. So I want to hear the origin story. But as you answer this, tell us why you guys decide to take on case law. Because you got the big guys, that have been around for before legal tech was even a thing. Like, why did you choose that? How does Describe come about?
Why case law is directly related to the origin story. And one of the things we say often is since neither of us are attorneys, and don't worry, we have great attorneys advising us. We're not trying to figure this out on our own. But in some ways we were, I guess, naive in a way, in a good way, about maybe how difficult this was, right? In some ways that's good because we approached it with a really open mind and looked at it kind of as a data problem. But the origin story actually was personal, and case law was what we needed to get through it.
I think what happens is if somebody's confronted with a legal issue and they're just in the general public, like maybe there's a tenant issue or a financial issue with a divorce or something, you don't know that these legal issues are going to hit you until they hit you. And most of the time, you're not prepared. And so we had an employment issue that I had to deal with like right during the pandemic. And I was trying to find all this case law or just find out about the topic. And I was trying to Google it. And Google at the time was just, you know, that was the only thing you could do was pre-chat GPT and all
Google
that.
Scholar, is that where you're looking to find the case law?
Yeah, Google Scholar would bring stuff up, but it was hard to get it to bring up specifics on things that were relevant. So I was reading like full opinions, and I bought these books on Amazon of just opinion books. And during the pandemic, I was laying in bed at night, like my bedtime reading was reading legal opinions. And Car was like, "I can't believe you're doing that,"
Yeah, I was
but you
playing
would have to
Stardew
read.
Valley and you were playing
Yeah,
reading case law.
yeah. But you'd have to read through as a novice who can't understand the legalese, like a 40, 50-page opinion, and you weren't sure if it had anything related to you until you got to the end.
Sometimes you still don't. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you still don't, because it's like 3 weeks between when you're talking to your lawyer, and you can't afford to call him every day and ask him every question. So that was in like 2021 or something, and so when ChatGPT came out in like late 2022, I didn't wanna just look at the chatbot, but I was like, "What else could I do with this tool?" Because it's all you do is start all we were doing is reading about this new amazing AI tool. So I looked into the API as a software engineer and saw that it was capable of, like, summarizing, but there was no documentation, so I figured out on my own kind of, and, just tried to run one of these cases that I had found on Google Scholar or wherever through it, and the summary was actually pretty good. So then I ran like our own like legal complaints through it just to see what it would do, and it was pretty cool. So then I was like, why don't I try doing this for, a whole bunch of cases? So I found like that Harvard case law project where they scanned in a whole bunch of cases to try to free the law and started doing all the cases in Massachusetts. And then I I figured out how to make them searchable, which again, this was pre-RAG and everything.
Explain what RAG is too, for those that might not know.
Well, now it seems like where you kind of cut documents into these chunks and then you embed those chunks like in a like vector embedding, which is how AI engines could search for things. And then you can match up what a user is searching for to these embeds. And then the closer the numbers are, the more close the search is. And so that's what it became. But I was kind of doing it before that was even coined. And so when that came out the following summer, I'm like, oh, wow, look at, I'm doing this RAG thing. And I didn't even know it. But anyway, so I made things searchable. And then I showed Cara, I'm like, look at Cara, you could search cases in Massachusetts.
He's an engineer, right? So he's always working on something. You never know what it is. And so sometimes he's making a game, sometimes he's like, whatever. It's always something cool. So I just was walking by him one day and I said, "Hey, what you working on now?" And I don't even know. And he explained it to me, and it was a very like aha moment. I'd worked in public health for a while at Harvard and at BU in the marketing team, but like got very interested in sort of like using systems to solve like big societal problems. And so obviously access to law and the whole access to justice and justice system is an area that could use some rethinking. So just got very excited at the idea of if this was helping us, it could help other people. And also just struck by how, if it was this hard for us and we live in this suburb of Boston called Newton, which is, you probably every time you walk out of your house, you're walking by an attorney. It's a great town. We have friends who are attorneys. We both went to college. Like we're very fortunate, and it was still hard. So you can just imagine how much harder it is for people who have less privilege.
Hey everyone, Vicky from Percipient here. I just wanted to give you a heads up about a new service Percipient is rolling out in 2026, subpoena compliance services. If your company gets a bunch of subpoenas or data requests, Percipient can help. Literally the whole process. You just forward the request to us and Percipient takes it from there. We'll check if it's actually valid, flag any issues, and let you know about any objections. Then Percipient works with your team to gather and prep the data. You'll see everything in Percipient's secure portal. Status, due dates, metrics, all of it. So you'll never be out of the loop. And my favorite part? If you're allowed to charge the requesting party for costs, Percipient software collects that money for you before we hand over the documents. Basically, Percipient handles legwork so your team can focus on the core work. If you want to chat about it, head to percipient.co or shoot us an email at subpoenas@percipient.co.
You say, all right, this is a product. Then what's the next step? Richard just like took what you'd already built and try to make it consumer facing.
Yeah, I just started reading in cases and states and then just put it up for free. And we're like, we're going to make this free search for everybody.
You started this 2021-ish. ChatGPT 2022 it comes out.
2021 was when this whole legal thing was happening. But, those things take years and years. So 2023 was when we actually launched this free search in July 2023.
Yeah, so like 3 years now. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. How big's the team now? And do you have developers helping you, or is it still been you?
This is the part that people always kind of get a little shocked by. So we're a 2-person company and we're not funded. And that is all on purpose.
That's great. No. To your point, you got two of the most expensive things covered, right? You got the marketing and the code. And in this day of AI, Rich, are you using like Claude code or Cursor or anything like that?
Yeah, I use OpenAI stuff. But what I was thinking about a week or two ago is like you hear about people learning how to vibe code and all that. And like they go from beginner to first base. But if you already know how to do everything and you're already like standing on, I don't know what the analogy would be for running around the bases multiple times, but it's like putting on a rocket pack or a jet pack for somebody who already knows what they're doing. So I could get done like the equivalent of like 10 programmers now. I have multiple machines right in front of me and they're all running things. And I could just it's like I'm just conducting an orchestra now of programmers.
But do you see a time where you guys get really busy, you got feature requests where you need the help, right? But instead of hiring 20 people, you can do 5, right?
Yeah, we're there now. And it's also like customer support and the things that like we like to do personal customer support and answer everybody directly. So, that's not completely scalable, but we don't want to just give that off to AI because, that's not our company vibe. So we just need support and those types of things. And of course, I can always use somebody who could program to do stuff, but it's a balance, and Cara would love marketing help, and we need other help and
Yeah, so we're
somebody to do
there.
our books for us,
But
so
that's a good
there's
problem
all
to
that
have,
type
right?
of
It's a
stuff. Yeah,
scaling.
we're there.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a good problem to have, right? And so actually, the help you need. Let's talk about why you need it. If I run into you at a barbecue, you give me this backstory. You say, hey, I had to do legal research on my own, and I create an app, and I say, oh yeah, what does it do? Like, what do you tell people? Like, what's the elevator pitch?
Yeah, that's great. And again, it's like the origin story is interesting and whatever, but when people are looking for a product or a solution, in all fairness, they probably don't really care because they're just trying to solve a problem, which is super important. So that's really what we're doing is we're in the space to solve a problem. And the problem that we're solving is that current resources that people can access for this type of work, and we can get into what the work is. There's a couple problems. One, they're extremely expensive, right? So for solo and smalls or people like in legal aid or other kinds of nonprofits, it's a very difficult thing, and higher education to some degree. It's very tough for people to access the really strong models. But because of the way we're built, we can price what we consider next generation leading AI tools for a fraction of the cost of the legacy tools for reasons we can get into. So it's not just it's a feel-good thing or you're supporting, a nice company or something. It's solving real problems that people are facing every day. And we, as I mentioned, we're very focused on the solo and small because they're the ones who need us the most. But we also believe that mid and big also would be interested in looking at what we're doing because even if they have the big established tools, those tools have AI built on top of legacy systems, which creates its own problems. And so looking at AI native tools, especially when they're at a price point that we are, is still, I think, a useful balance that people could have. So we're kind of in our own category, which has its own challenges.
But the app is basically it's a chat interface, so you can ask it legal questions, and obviously you can search for case law. Explain how those two work in unison. I messed around with it. It's really cool, and I want to talk about some things. But explain how they work together.
So we started out with that search where you could just type in things like neighbor's dog bit my kid or something, or someone slipped outside my store, or my employee injured a customer or something by accident. What do so all those types of things. And that was super cutting edge. And then also we put in tools like where you could search by citation or case name or keyword because people still wanted the traditional Boolean search. And we mapped all the legal issues of every single opinion so you could see what cases address what issues. And so that's what we had out there for a year, and that's still available. And that's called our legal research toolkit. But what happened was we noticed that people were using just this concept search where it's just to search for like basic terminology or case facts or whatever. They were trying to type in full questions, like a complicated legal research questions. And because of the way it works, it's not calling an AI, like it calls against our database. So it's not meant for that. So we were like, "No, we need to build something that's kind of like, like the
So
co-counsel."
initially, when you say database, it was just case law. It was just the legal authorities, and it was searching that and not giving you
Yeah.
the answer. Like hey,
Right.
what do I do? The dog next door bit my kid.
What it kinda did, and if you look at the iteration of our tools, there's always a step because we realized we got to a certain point, and then our community would say, "Yeah, but we need this." And so the first step was actually you get all this case law, and it'll give you things back, which is useful in and of itself, but it's not there's no action, right? It's like, here's stuff that might be relevant. The very first change we made was, when people said, "Well, if you give me a bunch of case law and it doesn't have treatment, it doesn't help me because I don't know if it's good law or bad law." So one of the first things we did was build an AI citator, which is now patent pending because it does issue level citation, which is pretty cool. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing, I mean, there's a lot of other little things, but the next step was, okay, this is cool. It gives me case law and it tells me if it's good or bad. And it gives me like legal issues I can explore, but it's not wrapping it up with a bow and giving me kind of like and now what type thing. So that's what the new tool does.
Yeah, you used it, Chad. So you noticed how it's like this multi-step process.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. You got six like basically phases. I thought it was really cool. Number one is, hey, give me your legal question. And then number two is it's going to analyze that and then prompt you to maybe clarify some stuff. And I'll give you a great example yesterday. So the legal question I put in there was, hey, how does California Business and Professions Code, how is it construed in Illinois courts, right? I messed up because I didn't put the code section, which when it was asked about California Business Professions Code 16600, which says you can't have restrictive covenants. And it prompted me. It said, hey, what section are you talking about? So it vets your question first and then goes through the steps. Explain the steps. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. What we noticed when we were looking at other tools and when we were using, even when you use like a general model, like if you're using a Claude or a ChatGPT or a Gemini or whatever, when you ask a question, most of the time, it'll just go off and answer, and it'll kind of fill in the blanks on its own. And so what we wanted to do is make sure what we noticed when we were doing some testing is that it does much better if it knows what it should actually deep research on first. So the first step is actually go through this question and make sure you have everything you need to do this research. So it comes back and asks clarifying questions. So if you forget to put in the jurisdiction, it'll say, where are you located? Is this like, are you looking for a federal thing or a state thing? Are you the plaintiff or the defendant? It'll ask the questions it needs. Then it'll go off and check and see if we have the coverage, because what it's doing is we've spent all these years building up our database of primary law. And so it's not answering just based on model knowledge, like general model knowledge. It's actually answering based on the law that is in our 100 million row database.
You just mentioned the coverage. I know it's growing every day and it's easier said than done to get that in there. What is it? What's in the database right now, regulatory and case law wise?
Yeah, so we have all state, appellate, and supreme, and we have federal, appellate, and supreme, and a lot of federal district. And then for statutes and regs, we have, I think, like the top 10 biggest, largest states. We have all federal statutes and regs, and we're growing every day. We're getting that ourselves. And so, some of the states' websites are just like nightmares to
terrible.
work with, as you've seen. Yeah.
I haven't practiced in a while, but last part of my career was in Chicago, and even as of a few years ago, you were still they were paper. You use what's that, carbon copy?
Yeah, it's like when you go to the radiologist and you have to like send a fax or whatever. Yeah, so the statutes and regs is an interesting one because this is when we talk about moats or whatever, like the primary law is really, really difficult to get. And there was, you possibly could license it from someone, but it would be so expensive, and then you're relying on another company for your data. Like, that's not a good place to be. So that's what we decided to create it ourselves. So we are probably one of only a handful of companies, and most of the other companies you would know their name and recognize it, and their revenue has a B in it. That has this corpus and is building it clean.
Well, part of that is because they're charging $5 billion a month for an average size law firm,
kidding.
right?
Right, I know, and we're charging $75 a month, so we're definitely in a different space, and that's super intentional. But and this is where the like paranoia comes in. We're lucky in a way that we're so risk averse because you've seen some companies, and we won't name names to embarrass anyone, but some people who have had some issues with their data, right? And they're getting in trouble for that, and that is not a place you want to be as a startup.
No, you already said moat. I wanted to talk to you about that. So coincidentally, just a couple weeks ago, I can't remember what I was asking. I think it was Claude. I was asking a question about something. The gist, I think what I was getting at was, the importance that the data is going to have, to companies as they move forward this AI age. But interestingly, and I'm pretty sure it was Claude, said that it didn't think that this moat was insurmountable. And you guys are kind of actually proving that, right? Like, we got the big players who've have case law for literally decades. Like, so you guys are up against this. What's it going to take to break that moat? Like, you guys are doing it, but I'm still sure it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, it's really, really, really hard. Like, there's no question. And this is one of the things. So I get asked two questions all the time, two very specific questions. One is, if I can use ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, why do I need something like Describe? That's why we did the white paper. We can talk about that later. And the other question I get is, well, does it do what Westlaw does? Is it Lexis? If I have Lexis, why do I need this? And the answer to that is like, well, you probably don't. Like, if you can afford, like the Clio tools or the amazing tools that are out there from other companies. Like, obviously, I think founders who are like us who say, we're going to kill Westlaw. I mean, that's just absurd. Like, you're not going to. What you do is you think about creating a different category and a new category. And I just actually posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday. The only way to win here is not somehow dethroning the big ones. Now, if you're Harvey or Lagora or someone like that, like, they have a different goal, but it's really creating a new category, I think, is where it gets interesting. So the idea that, a startup is going to somehow be Westlaw in a week is absurd, right? But there's so much room between Google Scholar and
Right.
CoCounsel. There's a lot of room between those two extremes.
We've been told we're kind of like where Case Text and Fast Case were, like kind of serving that part of the market before they got bought, because now they may or may not be serving that same type of the market in the same way. So there is some room there for people. We get lawyers who maybe need to do legal research once or twice a
Right.
month, and it doesn't justify $500 a month. So it's like, there's a bunch of people like that out there.
Going back to you said that, you go to ChatGPT, it just answers, unlike your app, which is going to prompt you further to say, hey, like it prompt me, what's the section you're actually talking about and what's the jurisdiction? Did you have lawyers help you vet that since you're not coming from a legal background per se?
Oh, definitely. Like I say, we run everything through a million times. And we made one of the best decisions early on was that the type of people we wanted to rely on were legal librarians. And I think everybody on listening to this knows why that's so important. Legal librarians are kind of the best placed people to look at these tools. So we feel very confident because, we can obviously test things ourselves, but having legal librarians give a thumbs up is basically the hardest thing you can do. And we should be announcing soon a pretty exciting partnership with someone in that space, and in getting into the curriculum of all the schools. It shows if you can get through that, you've passed a bar, right? Of no pun intended. But you always have to pressure test this stuff. And when you're comparing it, when you think about like the general models and why they fail and why purpose-built doesn't fail in the same way.
They don't fail.
What do you mean?
They still give good answers,
No, but
but
it's
you
a
don't
failure to
know.
give the wrong. I would say to give a misleading answer is a failure. I guess it depends on how you define it.
Yeah, that's true.
But so maybe we should talk about that. What does failure look like?
Yeah, no, let's talk about that. So there's a purpose-built versus the frontier, the actual model itself. Where are we going here? Because, everybody freaked out a couple weeks ago because Anthropic released a legal skill, which if people really dug into, it's not as, it's just a start. They would admit it. It just doesn't do what some of these other apps do. But where are we going there? And what do you say to the argument that, eventually these big models have a lot of money and access to a lot of data? They may get there. So number one is, what's your take on that? Number two, let's just for the sake of argument, assume that's true. How do you, as legal tech entrepreneurs or any entrepreneurs, how do you defend against that 5 years from now?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think anybody who's in our space, or probably any space that AI could infiltrate, who says, I'm not worried about it, they're either lying or dangerously naive, right? Because obviously we all have to think about that. But on the other hand, what makes sense for these companies to try to get into every little specific domain, maybe not. Maybe there's models where it's more of like a collaboration or a partnership or things of that nature. So what the big difference is, and this is why we ran the test, is what these models are trained on. So if you're querying like a regular ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, it is pulling answers to give your legal question from garbage, right? Is pulling it from good places and bad places, pulling from Reddit, it's pulling from whatever. And it's the way these things are written, they're built to please you, right? And to give you answers that it thinks you want to hear. So that's all about the predictive modeling and all that good stuff. So by the very nature of the way these tools are built right now, they're not particularly good at this authoritative type stuff. So the theory is that if you take purpose-built models, and this is why we did the test, and this is why we only tested against foundation models and not other legal tech tools, because the whole point we were trying to make was this was a industry-wide point that tools like ours, but others are included, that are trained and only referencing actual cleaned and vetted structured data in the legal realm, and of course this could be extrapolated to the medical realm or to any other realm, scientific of any kind, are going to just give you measurably more authoritative answers because they're only querying good data.
Well, What we did as one phase of the testing of the new tool Describe LM was right now it calls all against all of our data, but as a test, we turned that off and said, just use your own knowledge to get the answers. And so it was like the same type of interface, but it was just calling its own model knowledge. And we took the answers from that and then compared it to when it did against our own data. And it was actually, measurably different. It was kinda surprising how much different it was. Cara ran 'em through some rubrics and stuff. We didn't publish that as a white paper or anything.
Talk about that actually. So you did more testing than that. You guys ran it up against, you had to take the bar exam versus other models. Like, talk about that and what you found out there.
So this was some great idea I had that then I had to do all the work myself. So was questioning whether my idea was good or not. But in the end, I wanted to answer that question more authoritatively than just, oh, we think it's better. And for the market, I had just been at the LSC ITC, which is the where all the legal aid folks are looking at technology, and they have a problem that's similar to Big Law, but with a very different sort of outcome. Is everyone is looking at all these legal tech tools. And I actually heard this from some VCs. We weren't talking to them about raising. I was at an event with them, and they said something super interesting to me. They said, there's so much noise in legal tech right now. Like, we're really interested in it, and it's obviously a really cool, like, there's a lot of money, but they both said, like, we're just not going near it because we can't tell the difference between these tools. And that's this, whole other problem. And then I went to LSC ITC, which was completely the opposite. It's all these legal aid folks. And they said the exact same thing. Like, we know we need solutions, but we can't tell the difference between all these tools. So I started thinking, like, we need to do better explaining the tools in terms of benchmarking and how they work and all this stuff. And because it makes it really hard for the buyers to know what to trust. And then they go on things based like who has the biggest billboard in Times Square, which may or may not, actually signal their quality. I don't know. No shade to our friends. So the idea is like, okay, just fine. We'll just test it ourselves. And it's actually funny because testing yourselves comes with its own like caveat. It's like, well, oh, gee, you tested yourself and you did well. What a shock. I get it. So we tried really hard to be transparent, but hopefully other people will do the same kind of testing. So the point is that we need to give better metrics to the market so they can make good decisions. And so that was the idea, is like, let's try to answer this question. Because imagine we did test it and we said, are we performing differently than the general models? And the idea is you have to have an input and an output, right? If you don't want to hire like really expensive lawyers to review everything, you need to have something that has a question and an answer. That's why we did the MBE style questions.
So yeah, we're working on some benchmarking stuff, and that's a good point. You got to actually, if you're going to do it from scratch or whatever, you need to pay people to do it. But that's that great point where there's objectively, you've got an answer key.
And that's how we were able to test the reasoning.
We saw some old studies that ran against bar exams, but they just saw if they got the right letter. Like, did they answer A, B, C, or D? And that was the grading. But because it's been a couple of years and the models have evolved, we were like, not only did you get the right letter, but did you reason to it correctly?
So there's two parts of the white paper that are interesting. One is that, and we say purpose-built tools like Describe. So we think other purpose-built tools in the space would do similarly. We do think it's a category-wide thing. Although I'm sure we're better. No, I'm kidding. But so at least for we can say that until someone proves us wrong. So the idea is that it's sort of a proxy for legal reasoning. Like, obviously nobody's practicing the law with multiple choice questions. Like, that's not how it works. But at least it could give a little bit of a sense of like, okay, you arrived at this answer and because we asked the models to explain why. Why did you pick this? Right? And why did you not pick the others? Give us your reasoning. And that's where those grades came out with the confidently wrong. And that was such an interesting outcome because it was across all the models, but it was on different questions. So overall, the failure rate was high, right? If you look at it. So, and it'd be very convincingly telling you why this was the right answer. And if you imagine someone using that, and this is why I've kind of, worry about practicing attorneys using these tools right now, because it's very hard to separate the truth from the fiction. And there's some big consequences for people on that. So this was meant to be kind of like a cowbell, I guess, for the industry, be like, let's look at this more closely. And then it just so happened to come out right around the same time that 8 a.m. came out with their legal trends report from Nikki Black, where she was talking about how many people are saying that they're using these general models in their practice. And I think it was like 75% of the respondents.
What was the most surprising thing out of your benchmarking?
This wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it was a relief because, there was always a possibility that we wouldn't come out that different, right? And then the moat just dried up, right? Like right there, right in front of your eyes. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a surprise that we did so much better, but I think I would say the space between a tool like ours and the other tools, just how big of a gulf it was bigger than we expected.
Richard, what do you attribute that to? You guys did so much better because technologically, why?
Because again, it's not using just model knowledge. It's using our legal corpus and our training of it. We just spent years, like those 3 years since 2023. We weren't really like out there building chatbots and everything. We were just collecting and structuring data and going through and cleaning up the data and storing the data, which is my background. I actually enjoy
Yeah,
that,
he's weird.
which is weird.
Yeah, it's like that Princess and the Pea. Remember that fable? So it's kind of like, so when you think about and I love my analogies, so forgive me for this, but like you think about this giant pile of mattresses, right? And there's this princess up at the top. There's a pea somewhere at the bottom. She can feel it. She can't sleep. Super sensitive. Like if you think about the way you build these stacks or, your tech stack, if you have a little piece somewhere down there, it's going to cause a problem later on. And that's the risk of this sort of like wrapper universe or like vibe coding universe is if you don't really know how to build these giant complex systems, you're going to have a couple P's in there that will make you not be able to sleep. And it's really hard to build this. And so we have the dubious distinction. And I always feel terrible about the environment when I say this, but we're vegetarians, so at least we can feel that
You offset.
we offset it. Yeah. But we're one of the few companies in the world to spend or to use 100 billion with the B tokens. And the B was none of it was spent on client work. It was spent curating, cleaning,
That's
and
good though. No,
structuring the
that's
data.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
So it's the unglamorous stuff that is what gets you to the nice answer.
So 3 years
Mm-hmm.
behind you, you said 100 billion, right? 100 billion tokens later.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably more than that. The next level was 1 trillion.
Wow.
So we're somewhere in
We
between.
got a little plaque from Sam. It was very nice.
Good. And so what's on the roadmap? You going to raise money? You say you to the point now, probably a little helping hand would be nice. Like, where are we going from here?
So we are considering all options at this point, but the most important thing we're doing right now is building, and we have a new product coming out pretty soon. We'll be at Tech Show, and Rich will be hopefully able to show it, but we never stop building the next thing. But yes, for sure, we need to meet the moment, and it's a growth moment, and we are exploring all options to meet that growth moment. If that's a little vague, I apologize.
That's okay.
Right, but Rich will spill all the beans. Go just ask him.
I can't spill the beans when Kara's on because she'll give me a
Yeah,
look.
you don't want to get in trouble.
Guys, I really appreciate your time. This is great. People want to find more about the app Descrybe. Where do you want to send them? Or get in touch with you too.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always find me on LinkedIn. I seem to spend all my time on there, which is
That's good. You're a
weird
marketer.
and fun. I'm a marketer. Yeah. What else am I going to do with my time? So you can find me there. Of course, you can find us at our website. It's Descrybe with a Y because startups have to have weird spelling, of course. So please do find us there. Email us, what have you, and Descrybe.com. And everybody can get a free trial of the tool. No credit card, nothing. We're not going to force you into it. Just come try it. Check it out, see what you think. And we always want feedback. So if there's something that isn't there that you want, tell us and we'll try to build it. That's what we always do.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.